When people say that you're an electrician, it's not just about you go through the school and then all of a sudden you know everything about electrical. It's really more about what you specialize in or what you're exposed to when you're going through your apprenticeship and the type of work that you're always on. So mine was always more in the heavy commercial end of things, and that's really my sweet spot.
Welcome to the Career Curious podcast. I am your host, George Roots, and I am joined today by Andrew Taylor. Andrew, will you mind introducing yourself?
My name is Andrew Taylor, and my background is in construction for the last 20 years, about 20 years, specifically in the electrical industry. And I've spent my entire life being a musician. I'm currently residing in St. Peters, Missouri. I moved here a few years ago, and it's definitely a beautiful place. I like it a lot out here.
Oh, wonderful. So are we here to interview you about being a musician or a construction electrician?
Honestly, I can speak to both.
Well, let's start off with construction, and then maybe a follow-up podcast will be a musician. I think there'll be a lot of people interested in what does it take to be a musician.
Definitely, I could talk to that one.
All right. My first question, I guess, would normally be something like, how'd you get into it? But you made a quick distinction between a construction electrician versus just an electrician. What's the difference there?
Between a musician and an electrician?
Construction and
electrician. Okay, yeah. That's actually a really good question. The thing I would say is that electrical is a component of construction. It's obviously not the full picture, right? You're not going to hire an electrician to project manage an entire job, right? So really from the top down, on average, you're going to come across general contractors usually being at the top. Now, we can get into bigger projects, maybe like airports or just really, big skyscraper things, and they have other layers above them in construction, but we're at the bottom. And there's a very difficult position to be in subcontractors. We can go into why that's a difficult position because you don't have a lot of leverage, unfortunately. The suppliers that feed you will actually have more leverage than you, at the end of the day when it comes down to dollars and cents. And it's a high risk, high reward game. But to be a subcontractor is definitely a very needed position, but a very difficult position to be in as well. And we can go into some of that as well.
Sure, absolutely. How'd you get started? How'd you end up in that space?
I was working at Walgreens as a farm tech and had aspirations to be a pharmacist, at the time, and thought, that would be what a high paying job for 40 hours a week. I ended up getting turned down by Butler and Purdue at the same time. Those are the only two pharmacology programs in Indiana. And I still think it is, but they were just like Purdue I might have been able to do, but I was living on the south side of Indianapolis and that wasn't really going to work for 7 years. So I'm at a poker game, knew I was wanting to get out of pharmacy because there just wasn't going to be a future there, for me. Met a guy who was a roommate of a buddy of mine that I worked at pharmacy with. And we got along and he just looked at me one night and he was just like, man, you should come be an electrician with me. And I did not want to do it. I spent my whole life growing up where my father used labor as punishment. So I worked a lot. I just had it in my head, I'm not going to do physical labor. But I also didn't have much of a choice. So I took him up on the offer. And I remember the first time I went to a job site, because I came out of wearing khakis and button-ups and retail. You show up on a job site with a hard hat and jeans and some rough people. And it shocks you for sure. I think I was 22.
Yeah, that is amazing. And I can relate to that because I went to Purdue as well. Pharmacy was not going to be for me. Neither was engineering. Maybe I'll get a pharmacist and engineer on the podcast and they can tell us what their industry is like.
Oh, man.
So did you have to go through training? How do you actually get into the field?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's really two different main components to any piece of construction. And that is going to be, are you going to get in from a union perspective or are you going to get in from the merit shop philosophy? Those are the two, it's almost Democrat, Republican, the opposing force. There's pros and cons to both. And the individual just needs to pick what makes sense for them in any organization. It's really about how well you click with the people you're getting involved with. When you're younger, you just take everything and you're not really as concerned about does this suit me as much that you just want a job and a paycheck. You think you like doing this, so you're going to go check it out, or you have an interest in it, so you're going to go. Yeah, maybe sometimes you can avoid those processes, but if you can have a little control over what direction you take, just do a little bit of research on both
Which
ends.
path did you take?
I took the merit shop because that's what was in front of me. The union shops at the time had a lot more layers to apply to get accepted into a program versus a merit shop. I could be at a poker game and the guy says, be there Monday. Here's where you're going. There's a lot to it between the pay scales and the benefits. I would just say do the research. I don't think we have time in this podcast to go into the depths of it. But that's going to be your main starting point if you're interested in construction. Do I want to work for a merit shop, which is just non-union?
It sounds like you're setting us up for a third podcast episode, the deep dive. What does a typical week look like for you? What does Monday look like? Wednesday?
Oh, and to the last point I was going to say, they both have apprenticeship programs that you can get involved in. IEC and ABC are the two main ones for the merit shop to go that direction for the apprenticeships. It's a 4-year program. And you can typically now get 2-year degrees. And some of them actually even have set up where you go through the apprenticeship to get a 4-year degree, even through that. The union, I believe, is a 5-year for the electrical, I believe, for that. Double check me on that. I think they offer maybe similar type of programs. ABC is affiliated with Vincennes University, and that's where you would go through that process. You'll take some classes through that, typical college classes, nothing crazy. They know the focus for you is to be specific to the trade that you're in school for.
Actually,
yeah, sorry, that was a big piece.
Yeah, absolutely.
The education, finding a company, union or not, they'll get you in the apprenticeship program. Sometimes they pay for it. A lot of times you'll front the cost, they'll pay you back. Just kind of do your research a little bit on that. There's big companies, there's small companies, and I would say there is a company for every type of client that is out there. And that's something we can build on later as to why that is. So what does a Monday look like? If you're in the field, it's an early day. Typically, construction operates from 7 to 3:30. That's a pretty standard move unless you're in a scenario where you can't do that. Maybe the client can't have that when you have to work a second or a third shift. In general, though, that's where you're at. Job sites are going to be anywhere. The problem, I'll say a problem, but some people like it, is that you're not in the same place too long. You're not going to punch a clock in and out of the same building for 20 years, 30 years, when that job is done, you move on, or you might be halfway through that job and they need you somewhere else, and so that could be 20 minutes up the road. That could be 2 hours away. You could travel the country. The demand, or really whatever you want to do, is there.
Here's a question I've never asked. A 42-year-old engineer for a career, could I swap? Can I decide to do that, or is that too hard of a switch?
I would absolutely say that being in the field is a young man's game. If you feel up for the challenge, do it. I wouldn't recommend it. And there's different kinds of work too. And I always equate this to being like a doctor. When people say that you're an electrician, it's not just about you go through the school and then all of a sudden you know everything about electrical. It's really more about what you specialize in or what you're exposed to when you're going through your apprenticeship and the type of work that you're always on. So mine was always more in the heavy commercial end of things. And that's really my sweet spot. If you put me in an industrial setting, because they have different types of electrical scenarios, they need motor controllers and all kinds of things, a lot of ladder logic diagrams, and I don't really follow that well. That's not my sweet spot. I move very slow through those things. I just say, you can be an electrician, but you're really probably going to specialize in something along the way. And you'll find what that is.
That's very much how my profession is as well.
Okay.
Where, for example, you may be in product, but being in product is very different than being in infrastructure or caring about the constructs of how you build a website, or being in cloud computing is going to be different than.
Yeah.
So there's just so many aspects. And while it's all engineering, if you've spent 10 years making product, it may be more difficult to transition into, I can't think of anything not products. I'm a product engineer. So anyway, is there anything that you've done recently that you're proud of?
Right now, I'm on a venture due to the lack of people, whether they're in the field or whether they're in the office. Technology's doing a lot of great things, but I think we're a long way from setting robots out to build a building from the ground up and really having very little human interaction. So construction is something that is going to, even through all the advancements of technologies and AIs, that They will have a place in construction, absolutely. If you're more interested in the technology side of things, focus on the much larger companies that have the capital to invest to be able to spend on figuring out how technology gets integrated into our world, because construction is one of the oldest industries ever within human, just as long as humans have been around. And there's a lot of things that have not changed, and so it's almost like the force of change is just happening because it they just feel like something has to happen, a little bit. But it is a very status quo industry in a lot of ways. I would honestly say about 80 to 90% of companies adapt to the technology, just do what works. They're always trying to find ways to be efficient with what they know how to do. But at the end of the day, we can come out with all these lighting controls and low voltage and wireless stuff, but the electrician's going to be the one to install it and interpret what is going to actually happen. It's like we're not really reinventing the wheel no matter how much we try. And so the big companies are the ones that try to, because they know there's value there. Most companies won't try to reinvent the wheel. They just try to go, how can I make you work faster? How can I make you work more efficiently? There's some rough edges to construction. You kind of have to also have a psychological stamina to put up with a lot. I really am. But the old school method, like when I came up, I would leave the job site in tears. I'm not going to lie, because they just destroy you on the job, because that's how they were taught. And that's pretty typical in the industry. So I remember being, when I was in the field or working as an electrician, because my time has been split between being in the field and also in the office and developing the business side of things. I wanted to be able to get to the business side and go, hey, there's better ways to do this. We don't have to be really mean to each other out here. I've seen fist fights plenty, but you see a lot of stuff on big job sites. I'm not going to lie. There's some things that go down. I've almost thrown down with a few people in my time. Worst case, you just go to another job or you go back to work. Imagine doing that in an office setting, right? Like there's not a lot of industries where you're going to like physically throw down with somebody and then just go back to doing what you're doing. And then you might get a little slap on the wrist for doing it. Construction is definitely rough sometimes. It's not always. So you kind of got to be mentally prepared for that. It's because these guys are tired. They're exhausted. It's physically demanding. You really have to be up for the challenge to want to go out there and do this. I would absolutely say to any listener out there, know that about yourself first. There are people out there that love doing this and they get out there and do it. A lot of us that are out there just wanted a paycheck because it was a good thing to go do. I would say to electrical, you can literally teach a 12-year-old how to do certain things electrically. You can also go to MIT and get a Nobel Prize, right? Because electrical really is that in depth of what you can know and do. So I would say that part. The parts that I'm trying to focus on now are going to be a lot more geared towards how to make the industry overall better. So what I've been doing is working with another gentleman and establishing professional services for electrical companies. And what we're doing is essentially trying to convince the industry, because they don't want to change. The company I even left actually just didn't have a good reason to say, you can't work remotely. And we know that with the new people coming into the workforce, they want that. Not all of them, but that demand to work remotely, especially after COVID, is there. We miss out on so much in our industry because we just have this thing in our head where we go, no, I have to look over your shoulder every day and see what you're doing. But they will never tell me a good reason why it can't be done from my house, even a couple days a week. Once you get out of the field, 100% of what you do is in the office, right? So when you're in the office, what are you doing? You're sitting behind a computer. So if I can mimic the setup from an office to my house, why can't I do that?
I'm with you.
They don't like it. They don't like it. And when that's your only answer, that's not good enough for me, because that just tells me this is part of the problem. You just want to keep doing it the way you know how to do it. Sometimes it's a good thing. Here, it is a bad thing. It's a bad thing because you're losing people in an industry where there's already not enough people. What we're focusing on now is creating a project management company, an electrical estimating company, which has actually been around for quite some time. About a couple of hundred clients nationwide use our services for electrical estimating. We're developing a side that is going to include project managing because we have seen the demand for that. I think the biggest hurdle is going to be convincing you, the owner of a business. The vast majority of electrical contractors are probably under or around $10 million in revenue a year. They're still in that position where they're the owner, the CFO, a project manager, of HR. They're wearing all the hats, right? They're just at that level. And that is the vast majority of electrical contractors. And really any MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing.
Yeah,
That
this
is
all
true
makes a
for
lot
most
of
of them.
sense to me. Absolutely. I've interviewed a few people too who are in that space, and that is a common theme. So a lot of things you say ring true. I'm not sure if I release those podcasts, but they'll be coming soon.
Okay.
And so, yeah, about the ownership that resonates, I like single ownerships, about the working in the field. One of my close friends is in the industry for at least 20, 30 years now. Everything you say makes perfect sense. That's astonishing. And I love the fact that we've known each other at least softly for about
Almost
5
10
years,
years.
6 years.
Oh, what was it, 2017?
Range, yeah.
Yep.
And so I knew you were always an entrepreneur. So knowing that your win or the thing that you're proud of is in that space is really cool. Like that you're using what you've learned in your profession to bring that out in your passion.
Absolutely. And it's a huge space to do it because the amount of clients, they're going to have to do this at some point. Estimating is not going to go away. Project managing is not going to go away. We can find efficiencies. We can do things better. But at the end of the day, you still need to have those people and that work still needs to be done. One of the core pieces of our industry is to bid projects. You're going to go out on every job and spend capital on trying to get a job that you may not get. And really your strike rate, you're good if you go out and get 30% of all the estimates you do. So there's a high overhead already built in if you want to keep climbing. There is that line where guys have to go, is it just going to be me plus 2 or 3 guys, or am I going to grow a business? And
So let
if
me
you
ask you,
go on that side, that's very hard.
I want to have a couple more questions. What is next for a construction electrician after this? Not for you specifically, but for someone who takes your journey, what would be next for that type of role?
I think our industry is spending way more time focusing on how to create individuals to be more efficient across more tasks. And I think that's standard across a lot of companies. But there was never a cushion in our industry to splurge on concepts or positions that weren't necessary. So it's always been a tight ship. You know, you bid a job for $1 million, you win it. That was the easy part. Now go build it for less than $1 million because you ain't going to get no more money. You know, it's not like cranking up sales or advertising to boost sales for Q3. Q4 has got to get up there. So we got to get to our marketing team. No, you just go and win that job. If you get it, you got to go perform it. And performing it is by far the hardest part. A lot of risk, you know, getting out there. So when a commercial electrician, what are they looking at down the line? I think they're going to be in the average scenario, probably just being squeezed to perform more efficiently. They're always looking for good ideas that they don't have to invest in.
Gotcha. So there's not a title above that, though.
How can you work your way up? So what you can do is you can actually go and just start as an apprentice and work your way up to being a journeyman electrician. You get your card, you get whatever it is, you know, that's recognized. From there, you in the field, you can still move up from there. You would probably move on to a foreman, and you can run into being a field superintendent, which is basically like a riding boss where you're going across multiple projects. If you want to move into the office, then from that point, you would start needing to just work it out with the owners and say, hey, I want to be in the office and start working the business side. That's really going to come down to a conversation you have with the company. You don't really go to college to learn how to be an estimator, right? There's programs, there's, you know, things you can do online. I don't know if they're really that valuable. I haven't seen the ads for them. But you want to understand your industry, number one. You want to understand electrical well enough, right? But the main part is, are you business acclimated in your mind to be able to go out and understand how to run a business? When you step foot in an office, the only thing you take with you that you've learned in the field, which is invaluable, but the thing you really take is just understanding the pieces and parts. When you go to estimate a job, you're going to start as an estimator or a project engineer, kind of like a project manager assistant. When you get good at that and you move into project managing, from there you get into operations, you know, typically, or pre-con. There's 2 different divisions there. All the stuff that happens before winning a job. And once you win the job, you turn it over to operations and then they run within that's all the other project management. And then you can run the office, you know, itself and then work your way up in the typical executive level from there.
Absolutely.
So you really can't go from apprentice to CEO.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, let me see. I have two more questions. So if you could go back in time, let's say to Andrew year 1, year 2, what advice would you give Andrew?
Be a musician.
Best answer
I
ever.
don't know. I think I would probably just say it will get better. I think you have to do is no one's really going to advocate it for you. I remember the last time I was always outside and it was very cold, insanely cold, heavy winds, and we were building a giant eagle up in Carmel, Indiana. And I was up on that scissor lift in like negative 10 degrees. It took about an hour for your water bottle to freeze over completely sitting outside. And I said, I'm not doing this again. I've done this long enough. Back to the young man's game. Some people don't mind it, but I knew this wasn't my path. But I wanted to go, how can I take what I've learned? Because I don't want to throw all this away. What can I do? I thought, well, I remember the school I graduated from, they said they would take people that just graduated to be electrical instructors. So I thought, let me just start building my resume. I called ABC and I said, hey, are you looking for any instructors? And they said, yeah, actually, we need a first year instructor. We need a couple of them. So I interviewed, went and did it. And they're like, okay, you're doing that. And let me promise you, that guy told me this in the field a long time ago. He goes, he was a foreman. He goes, and I was in my 4th year apprenticeship, right? So you're in your last year and you're feeling good about yourself. And he goes, let me tell you something. I said, what? He goes, there's nothing smarter than a 4th year apprentice. And there's nothing dumber than a first year journeyman. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And he goes, okay, big shot. Okay, here you go. Here's a set of plans. Here's everything you're going to need. Good luck. And I'm like, yeah, of course. I got this. Watch out, dude. Watch out. Man, I went 3 days. He comes and checks on me and I didn't get anything done because I'm just trying to be like, I'm supposed to know what this means, And so I would absolutely say that when you graduate, that is a true statement. Be very humble when you graduate. This was really just the beginning of your learning in this industry. So if you want to go that path, that's what I ended up doing. I was very humbled by teaching first year electrical because all these things I thought I knew, when you're standing in front of a class for 4 hours giving the whole thing, you're done in 20 minutes and you're like, now what do I do? Who wants to watch YouTube videos? So that's a very humbling experience. But I ended up doing that for 4 or 5 years as an instructor. That led me to meet another 4th year instructor who had worked for a much larger company at the time, one of the largest in the country in Noblesville, and said, hey, we really get along. I could use help in the office. Are you interested? Because I was still in the field at that time. And I said, I'd love that. So we went through the whole thing and they hired me. And I think I was there for 2.5 years. That's where I met you, through Matt. Right. So that's how all that played out. But then that experience from there, once you're in that industry and you have that title, whether you're good or bad, they can't take that away from you. You just got to keep moving. If you're like me, you just got to keep moving. I am dumb until I am not. You know what I mean? And like once I get it, I get everything to the left of it. I get everything to the right of it. I get everything in front of it, behind it, on top of it, but up until that point, I don't get it. I was a guy that was always raising my hand in class all the time. People are like, dude, just put your hand down, please. We want to go home. And I'm like, I don't understand how this works. And that was true all 4 years of my apprenticeship. But I'm glad I did it. I wasn't pressured into, shutting up. If you have questions, ask them. Everybody learns different. Some people think they got the answer and they don't. That's the best part, when they act like they do and they'll tell you they do. But then you actually get educated on the topic. And then you're just like, that guy's an idiot. He sat there with all that confidence, acting like I was the problem.
Just to wrap it up, my last question. I think that was a wonderful answer.
Sorry.
Are there any careers that you're curious about? If you weren't in this industry, just like in a vacuum, what are you curious about?
In life, outside of electrical.
If everything was set to zero, if you had no job, never had a job, and you want to know what jobs are there?
I really enjoy everything that we don't understand as a species. I love the idea of remote viewing. Very curious about what humans are really capable of doing. Can we tap into other dimensions? The idea of why are we here? I'm very much into space and the concepts of space. The quantum world definitely attracts me because we don't understand it. Really, I mean, like we do enough to detonate a nuclear bomb. We get it, the math mapped out correctly. So we know there's things that are correct.
Well, I'm going to see if I can find a molecular physicist, philosopher, and see if we...
Please do. So many questions.
Let me see. I've spent the last 20 minutes to a half hour asking you questions. Do you have any questions for me?
How did you get into your world? What made you go into programming? I've always loved the idea of being able to code, just knowing how a computer works. I sit here and watch YouTube videos on how you build a microprocessor chip or what is memory. Like, how does this actually work? Yeah, who was the guy, the Wozniak guy or whatever his name was, just sitting there like, yeah, if we connect this and this, we got a 0. If we do this, we get a 1.
People way smarter than me. I'll tell you how I got started though. Entrepreneurship. I always had this inventor's mentality of wanting to build things. When I started a company to build software for people, I had to get better at it because people required better software. So I began to get better at programming because I became the instrument to be an entrepreneur. Okay. And they wanted to like a service like Uber, or like if someone wanted to have Uber of camping. And
that's a good idea, George. We should talk about that.
if someone had an idea like that and I want to help, I don't have the resources to buy an engineer. I don't have the resources to buy marketing and understand all the SEO stuff. So I started just because I wanted to be in business, and I became my own tool. But thank you so much, Andrew, for your time. Thank you for answering all the questions. And hopefully we'll have you on the show again.
It was a fantastic time being here. Thank you, George.